This podcast is part of the Listen Frederick Podcast Network. To learn more, visit listenfrederick.com.
The Fedora Files.
Hello and welcome to the Fedora Files. I am Gregory Fedora and welcome back. We are still in South Mountain Magic, Stories of Maryland, and we're on Chapter 3, which is the traditions of the Indian. This is an interesting chapter. It's not so much the traditions of the Indian, it's more about some ghost stories and some stories about the Native Americans in this area, as not so much the traditions of the Indians of this area. The chapter starts with her kind of saying goodbye to her lovely home atop South Mountain, and then she begins to talk about how man seeks to understand the unknown. But because humans are fallen in her theological mindset and in her belief system, man gravitates towards the preternatural and the magic and the darkness. And we learned preternatural. If you listen to my previous podcast where we dealt with chapter 1, I went over supernatural versus preternatural. And as I, stated, there was a difference. Supernatural was more along the lines of the God and goodness. Preternatural was more the darkness, demonic, wizardry, witchcraft, things she considered bad. And so she felt because of the fall man gravitated towards the preternatural more than the supernatural. And that's where we are in. And then she introduces us, after going into this, of how man dives into the darkened side, that she decides, well, now's a good time to introduce you to the Zittle clan. And the Zittle clan were the people where the Wizard of South Mountain came from, Michael Zittle. So you can tell right away because she's talking about the darkness and all that. And then she introduces these guys. There's kind of she's shadowing, kind of pouring shade onto them, kind of like these dudes are bad. And and as she goes on to describe them, and it's not long, it's only about a paragraph. There's an obvious disdain she has towards the Zittles, describing them in way less than flattering terms, saying, just, you can tell she doesn't like them. And she feels that the whole bunch of them, like all the Zittles, it's like kind of a blanket statement. They're just heaped in superstition. And preternatural affairs. Like she's just like, these guys are no good. So later there's a chapter later on where she talks more about the Wizards of South Mountain. We already know she doesn't like the Zittles. She is definitely not going to like him. And I already know she doesn't. I know her thoughts on him. I've studied that. So she has a lot of disdain for the Zittles. She then goes on to talk about Native Americans, and the stories she shares here are super, super, super harsh and seem to be the kind of propaganda used back in the day to paint them as a less, kind of less than human, like savages. You get this idea that she has this thought out process of how she thinks about Native Americans and basically like how the culture of that day felt about them. It's interesting to read because you really get the mindset of the period and how they were viewed and basically how they were feared. Like the culture of the Americans feared the Native Americans in a way because they didn't understand them. I'm not going to really go into the stories here because to me, they're worth reading and kind of reflecting on just to see how people thought and felt, but I don't think they're really something I want to perpetuate because I think there's a stereotype here that we now know is not true, as we've learned more through anthropology and sociology and stuff, that the Native American culture did love family. They did, cherish that. And so the way she kind of describes them, you're like, whoa, they are harsh. They don't like their kids. They don't give a rat's patootie about anyone, even amongst themselves. And we know now that is not true at all. They're very, clan oriented, very family based. So, the tribe stayed together. They took care of each other. And she kind of paints them as differently than that. I will say that reading these stories, it is actually a growth opportunity. It's kind of a way to look at how do we view other groups of people, whether it's religious or different sects, different orientations, different than us. When like someone that's not like me, they come from a different part of the country, they come from a different part of the world, or they come from a different belief system. But how I interact with them or how I think about them, am I focusing in on an exaggerated stereotype that is not true? Is that stereotype being perpetuated by something I've seen, whether it's a movie, TV show, or even like, because there are people who do act like the stereotype of the group that they're a part of. And are they perpetuating this and kind of, pushing it along as well? And that may not necessarily be good either. I mean, there's a lot of groups out there that when you meet a person one on one, they're nothing like what the stereotype is or the exaggeration is. And it can be political parties, it can be religious affiliations, and so on and so on. So it really kind of helped, to like look at that for me, to just think about, just what she was perpetuating and where it was going. So once we got past that, she introduces us to a very cool, colorful character that she calls Aunt Patty. Now, Aunt Patty's like one of those like ladies who you would just love to hang out with. She just seems like the person that probably makes the best food in the world. And you're just chilling with her on her front porch, eating food, chatting, having some sweet tea, and having a good old talk. And she has stories to share. And I like how she kind of wrote Aunt Patty, because she did it, and like when you're looking at it, like the things she wrote aren't words. But when you read it, you understand what she's saying, but it's kind of helping you understand the accent. And I think Aunt Patty is part of the Zittle clan. She doesn't say that, but we do know that she grew up in South Mountain. She lived in the area, Boonesboro, Middletown, Zittletown area. So I believe that she is part of that clan, but maybe not. But she is from this area. So, but she's just very interesting. And she has a lot of cool, fancy little stories to share, most of which are about the Native American ghost, or as she says, the skeleton, the Indian skeletons. So, which is the Indian skeletons. And she has stories about skeletons running in the woods. She has some other colorful ways of describing other people, which I'm not going to repeat. But Miss Aunt Patty, she's well, you just got to let Aunt Patty talk. Let her tell her story. She's got stories to share. Now, these stories are entertaining. They're fun. Most, like I said, are about what she calls the skeleton Indians. And she seemed to say that they were such a common sight that, like, the kids weren't necessarily afraid of them. I mean, they were, but like if they were playing in the creek and they saw them walking in the woods, and the Indians would wave and they would say goodbye as they left. They always seemed to say goodbye, which was interesting. They would jump scare you, they would chase you, and then they'd be like, goodbye. They weren't saying goodbye. They were saying this other Indian phrase. I'm not going to even try and say it, because one, Aunt Patty couldn't even say the word skeleton. So I don't know that what she was saying is even close to what the Indian was saying. She had these great stories about it. And another story she had was about the schoolhouse she went to. And I need to look this up, because I believe the schoolhouse she's talking about is on the other side of South Mountain, closer to Boonesboro. And I want to see if it's still around. I haven't really researched this, but as the story goes, the schoolhouse was built on a Indian burial ground. And as everybody knows, that's the perfect combination for a scary movie. And so there you have it. Indian burial ground. We built a schoolhouse. So there's Indian skeletons all around the schoolhouse. Now I've been in South Mountain. I've been in the woods. I've never seen a skeleton Indian anywhere. But the fact that the Indian burial ground on the schoolhouse story is here, this led to a very cool, almost like a headless horseman scenario. But unlike the headless horseman, this ghost was good. What seemed to happen was there's a schoolmaster involved in everything, just like headless horseman. Aunt Patty and her friend Jake. Now at this time, Aunt Patty's not Aunt Patty; she's just Patty because she's a kid. Well, Patty and Jake were out playing around as the evening getting dark, and they saw a light on in the schoolhouse, but it was an eerie light. It was like the kind of light you see when you see one of them skeleton Indians walking around, because they put off light and whatnot. So they go up there, and Jake, he's kind of a daredevil as he is described, and he's like, man, let's see what's inside. And Aunt Patty or Patty's like, no, don't go in there, Jake. No, it's gonna get us. And he looks in, and the light kind of goes away, but then he sees the schoolmaster laying on the ground, and he thinks he's dead, and he thinks the skeleton Indian killed their schoolmaster. And back in that day, schoolmasters kind of did a trip, and that's like even in Headless Horseman, Ichabod Crane was not there. He was supposed to travel from town to town and be schoolmaster for a little while here, then he'd move on to the next. And that's kind of what happened. They would like be traveling school marms and schoolmasters and take turns. Well, the schoolmaster, they go in, and he's not dead. He's passed out. The fire is out, so it's really cold in there. So they know that the light they saw wasn't the fire. It was the Indian. So they go in, and he's just doubled over in pain. He's sick. He's not feeling well. So Aunt Patty and Jake carry the passed out, injured, or sick schoolmaster home, and basically it saves his life. Here we have the Indian ghost saving someone, like kind of bringing them to it, and that was interesting. Then Aunt Patty has other stories where they were scary, or the scary ghosts like showing up and scaring her grandfather and her uncle and other family members. But it seemed that these ghosts weren't necessarily malicious in nature. Because I would think if they really wanted to kill you, because they could just sort of show up and do these things, they're like, bam, bam, they'd show up and they could kill you if they could just show up, but they don't. They kind of scare, they chase people. And then when the person would get in and shut the door, they'd like bang on the door, and then they'd say their goodbye, and they'd leave, and they'd look out, and the thing was gone. And I would think, if it's a ghost, is the door really going to stop it? I guess it's the skeleton. Maybe skeletons can't go through what, but the fact that it's not dead, that kind of, that's something, it's a skeleton ghost skeleton. It just looks like a skeleton. But anyway, so these were the stories she shared, and Aunt Patty's the end of the chapter. And there's a few other stories Aunt Patty shares, and I don't want to share. Like I said, when I tell them about these stories, I don't want to share too much, because I want you guys to read it, and I want you guys to like see what it's like, and really get the idea of what these different stories were, because they're fascinating. And like I said, it's really cool to get into the mindset of that time period and learn about these people and really grasp it, because it's part of our history. It's part of our cultural growing up in, and I think it helps us understand. Like I said, for me, it made me like some of the first part of the chapter when she's going into the Indians and how people thought about them. It really made me think, wow, do I think that way? Am I doing that to people? Like, do I have like when someone arrives that I've heard stories about this belief system, do I think this way? Or, and I don't think I do really, because I kind of enjoy everybody. I want to learn. I'm one of these people. I just like to talk to everybody, and I want to learn from everybody. And I think in a way Madeline Dahlgren did too, but she did have kind of a prejudice, as it were, not necessarily so much towards the Native Americans as much as the Zittles, which is interesting. So she had more of a disdain for people who, in her mind, weren't educated and who were bound to superstition. But she herself seems to be bound to superstition. But as I always say, like the thing we don't like most about ourselves, we kind of put onto other people, and then we don't like that about them. So it's one of these catch-22s where, like, I found even with myself, things I don't like about myself or about other people are actually things I do that I don't like about myself, but I put it on that other person, like, man, why do they do that? And then then my family points out, well, you do that all the time. And it's like, well, crap, you're right. So I think that she had some superstitions and some fears. And instead of just being like, yeah, I'm afraid of this and that, she kind of painted it on the other people, and especially the Zittles. And as we go on, we're going to find out that she really didn't like the Zittles, and especially the Wizards of South Mountain. She had a lot of disdain. So that was pretty much the end of chapter 3. And we're going to move on next to chapter 4, which is titled Superstitions and Apparitions. That'll be next time. I hope you'll join us. I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're liking and getting into this book. I'd like to do other books. And if there's a book you think would be interesting, whether it's about ghosts or monsters or whatever it is, tell me about it. I would love to dig into it. And however you found me, if you're watching me on YouTube, thank you. If you found me on Spotify, check out my YouTube channel because I do monster videos as well as fast facts and ghost story videos that aren't on the podcast. So please go check out the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/The Fedora Files. And there'll be a link below. And check out my Instagram. I also put stuff up there all the time. I do some art and some photo manipulation of different like monsters and things, kind of like photorealistic as opposed, what I think these creatures probably would look like if they, if we got a real photo of them that wasn't blurry. So if you are into that kind of stuff, you're like that kind of thing, please check it out. I'm working on a store because I know some people have asked me about t-shirts with some of the different photo manipulated monsters I've made, such as the Snallygaster, the Bildad, and some of the others. So check those out and come back, tell others about me, and please like, share, subscribe on all the different formats. I really do appreciate it. As always, stay safe and keep searching.
The Fedora Files.
Check out FedoraCRT.com today.